Hello and welcome. This is Joan Amon, editor-in-chief of In Their Own League, and today we are so thrilled and excited to have Ashley Hoff with us, author of the hot new book, With Love, Mommy Dearest, also first book to kick off our summer reading list here, and so go out and grab it. But let's jump right into Ashley's discussion here. Ashley, thank you for being with us. Mommy Dearest is a cult classic. Some call it a camp cult classic. Why would you consider it? First of all, let's define camp. What is camp to you?
Well, I think Camp basically suggests that it is a very oversized performance. It is a very oversized subject matter. It's basically the idea of taking an opera and something that is of operatic size, stature, and grandeur, and performing it on a soapbox on a street corner. I think that's one way of defining it. Mommy Dearest was, when it was released in 1981, was basically anticipated to be an awards-winning serious drama, serious biopic drama depicting the life. Oh, can you hear me again?
I can hear you. No worries. So anyway, you were saying that camp is almost of an operatic quality, and I agree with that.
Yes.
Big opera fan myself.
You know, did you get the part where I was saying that it was, seen as a very serious drama? And
Yes.
unfortunately, it was received as this very over-the-top, scenery-chewing performance that Faye Dunaway gave. And there were a lot of other elements that contributed to it. The script had a few, you know, uh, some very provocative dialogue that has turned out to be immensely quotable. And the movie is viewed by a lot of people as kind of an unintentional comedy.
Yes, I agree. I don't think I can understand Faye Dunaway being very disappointed
Yeah.
in how it was received.
Well, and Faye Dunaway, as a method trained actress, a theater trained actress, she takes her craft very seriously. And she felt very personally hurt by the way the movie was received, and frankly, for being criticized for giving the performance that she was directed to give. And I totally get that. There were a lot of other elements that contributed to the film's reception, but I think first and foremost comes that it it's almost as if Faye Dunaway gave quote unquote too good a performance.
Which, to a certain extent, I agree. She immersed herself so much into the role. She pretty much lost who she was, and all you saw was Joan Crawford. There was no Faye Dunaway anymore. She totally immersed herself so much that it was to the point where, well, who begins and where does one end? The personalities both seem to merge so closely.
Exactly. Well, it's very interesting because in 2005, it was when they released the DVD version of Valley of the Dolls, they included with the film a number of bells and whistles, including both Patty Jukes as well as Barbara Parkin's audition, their screen tests in the role of Neely O'Hara. Barbara Parkins ended up playing the role of Anne in the movie, but because she wanted to, and because the studio acceded to her wishes, she was also given a screen test as Neely. And it's very interesting because Patty Duke has endlessly been criticized for giving as much a scenery chewing performance as Faye Dunaway does in Mommy Dearest. Yet when you look at the two
You look at the two actresses.
and
Uh,
and Barbara Parkins is a very good actress, but
mhm.
her performance is so subtle by comparison. The role of Neely really needed that scenery chewing, tough as nails persona that Patty Duke gave. And it's the same thing with Faye Dunaway in Mommy Dearest. She was criticized for giving an over the top performance, but you wouldn't want anything less. If she gave anything less, we would not be talking about her performance 43 years later. Is she over the top? Absolutely. Because the truth of the matter is, Faye Dunaway gave a powerhouse performance for the ages And that is why, love it or not, uh, people flock to this movie. People are still talking about it. And frankly, people very much are not ridiculing Faye Dunaway's performance. They're not laughing at her. They're really, it becomes this very cathartic experience for viewers when they're watching Mommy Dearest.
Well, certainly her role wasn't the only controversy with this film. There were some deviations from the book that heightened the controversy. Certainly, the author herself,
Yes,
Christina Crawford, wasn't totally delighted. So let's talk a little bit about that. Christina Crawford wrote this book. It was supposed to be a tell-all book, but it was also supposed to be her own catharsis, right? I mean, it was supposed to be her own almost therapeutic looking back on her troubled life with her mother.
exactly. And she really did have a long, uh, very tenuous relationship with her mother. Her memoir was published, Mommy Dearest, was published by William Morrow in 1978, just a year after Joan Crawford's death. And let's face it, Joan Crawford's fans were still around at that time. They still fondly remembered the movie star. And Christina came under a lot of criticism for the movie, for writing the book, whether it was for telling tales out of school or whether it is because she was alleged to have made up the whole thing or exaggerated things. You know, there was a lot, she was criticized for that a lot. And when the movie came out in 1981 and she finally saw it, she saw the inaccuracies in the movie. She saw the liberties taken for dramatic purposes, as happens in 99.9% of any
Absolutely.
kind of biopic filmed.
Mhm.
And she, you know, felt the sting because she was still given another round of criticism for making things up. And of course, the filmmakers made a number of scenes up. So many inaccuracies that deviated from her original book. And, it's easy to see why she herself dislikes the film so much.
Absolutely. I mean, at the same time, as you bring out in your wonderfully researched book, it was an opening of a dialogue for what she had gone through and what so many other people have experienced in their lives, which is basically a form of domestic violence, abuse, that
Yeah.
was not talked about at the time, which obviously led to some of the criticism she received.
Yeah. The one that Christina did appreciate about the film is that its popularity, along with her book, helped open up that conversation about not only child abuse, but also making the clear distinctions between disciplining your child, which nobody really disagrees with, and really out and out abusing the child or taking your frustrations out on the child in the moment without restraint. And I think that's one of the things that Christina herself has recognized. The film, did a public service in that regard. I think there are clearer distinctions being made today between those two ideas, discipline and abuse.
And I really respect the balance you find, but there are some friends of Jones who even admitted begrudgingly, maybe there was something odd going on there. And as well as documenting all the blowback that Christina got, were you surprised that some of Jones' friends did kind of grudgingly admit they were aware that maybe things weren't totally happy at home?
Well, I mean, and there are loads of people on both sides who
Mhm.
were out to defend their friend and their coworker, Joan Crawford, and question Christina's accusations or question, let's say, the severity of her accusations. There were other people who themselves said they witnessed uh, harshness. And, my book is not out to trash Joan Crawford's name. And I don't think necessarily Christina's book does that either. It's very interesting because when the movie came out, Christina actually went on the record and said, my mother was a far warmer person than what was portrayed on screen. And she also felt that her mother was a far more than she was really given credit for. So Christina's book doesn't necessarily trash Joan's name. Um, but that's neither here nor there. The movie, the movie's a different story.
I love the way you captured that. I love the way you captured how the movie really went off on its to have a life of its own, way off the rails from where the book came from. It deviated on several very important points, and you really got to a nice balance of revealing how the movie really just kind of spun out, as opposed to what the book was saying. And I really
Yeah.
appreciated that. Why do you think the film is just so captivating even now? I mean, of course, it was panned to a certain extent then, but even then, it did make money. I think that's important to realize. This was not a financial failure, this movie. Maybe it was not received the way
Yeah.
it was conceived to be made, but it was not a
From
financial failure.
from the beginning, it received critical critics. The critics did not like it a lot. But audiences flocked to the movie from the beginning. The movie was never a commercial failure. And it's very interesting. One thing that I've been asked a lot is why early on the LGBTQ community early on embraced Mommy Dearest. And they were not the only ones, but they certainly were among the most passionate fans of the movie. And I've been asked why that is. I think one of the reasons is because so many within that community themselves experienced abuse or bullying, whether by, if not their family members, their peers at school or possibly coworkers in the workplace. And so they identified with both the put upon child, but also on some cathartic level, rooting for the bully, Joan in the confrontation scenes seeming to gang up on little Christina. There can be something cathartic or therapeutic in watching and cheering along with the scenes. Um, it's a very interesting experience. There are lots of people who view the movie as drama, or they view it as, reveling in old Hollywood glamour. But there are just as many people who, find it that very cathartic experience because they themselves experienced some sort of bullying or abuse, and they're just kind of working something out within themselves. It's kind of an interesting phenomenon, and there aren't that many films, I think, that offer that kind of connection with the audience.
I would agree. I think that it's very it's an important truth to come out about relationships in a family. And if this film does bring that out and open that discussion, then that's a wonderful thing. I mean, no matter what you think of the film itself on its artistic merits as a film, if that truth comes out and starts a conversation, then that's
Yeah.
important, and that is reason enough for it to endure, certainly. But also, let's talk about that art direction though, because the art direction was exquisite. How they
Oh,
built the
it's a
set, the costumes. Oh my goodness.
beautiful, lavishly produced movie. I mean, it really was very much in the tradition of the golden age, the tradition of golden age Hollywood. This was a very handsomely produced movie. It had top-notch set design, um, costume design, hair design. They had people who had actually worked with Joan Crawford who were populating some of the cast and crew members. Um, they took great pains to try to recapture that Hollywood glamour. And I think they succeeded in that regard. It's a beautiful film to look at from that point of view. Can you hear
Yeah.
me?
Yes, yes, and I would agree. I
Okay.
think that
Okay.
if you want it, that you can view it obviously. You bring to a film, what you view it to be, but you can appreciate a film for different aspects. Maybe the acting
Yes.
wasn't quite what you expected, but you can still see merit in the design and art direction and camera work and costumes and makeup and obviously there are other aspects to the film than just the performances. And I think this film really had incredible art direction and costumes and makeup. They put so much heart and effort into it, and it appears on the screen in every frame. It's just a beautiful film. Take what you want from it as
Yeah.
for the performances, but it really the budget shows on the film, and I think you brought that out, that that was exactly what the director was aiming for as well.
Well, and that's one of the things that producer Frank Yablans was famous for. You could see every penny of the budget on the screen. Um, Irene Sheriff, who had worked on a number of classic films from The King and I to Hello Dolly, you know, big, lavish, old world productions, was brought basically out of retirement to work on this movie. And the costumes that Faye Dunaway is fitted with, I mean, she looks really great. You know, a lot of people have said, well, Faye Dunaway doesn't look anything like Joan Crawford. And the truth of the matter is, she doesn't, despite the fact that she physically in life did not resemble Joan Crawford. With the hair, the makeup, and those gorgeous costumes, she conveyed every inch of the glamour that Joan Crawford had presented back in her classic movies. Um, you know, it's one of those. Can you hear me?
Yes, and I agree. I think it's a real
Oh, okay.
time capsule. It's a real time capsule look back. I think that's one of the appealing parts of the film and why it enjoys. It is a bit of a time capsule to look back and say, wow, what was that like to live in that era? What was the homes that it's kind of an intimate look at how the golden age stars actually lived. I think there's a great appeal in that.
Yeah. Well, and today they would just, you know, green screen and CGI the set and everything like that. But for 1981 on the Paramount sound stages, they really built this mansion. Those sets, which were on two or three different studios on the lot, I mean, that entryway hallway has real marble. The fabric on the walls, the wall covering, is tufted silk. This really was a lavish production. And what I realized in the writing of this book is that what I was capturing was the end of two separate eras in Hollywood filmmaking. This really was the nail in the coffin for the real golden age of Hollywood, which technically had ended years earlier. But this was at a time when, of course, you know, so many of the stars of that era were starting to pass away. For instance, Joan Crawford passing away in 1977. But I also recognized that not only was this film marking the end of Golden Age Hollywood, it was also marking the end of the 70s new wave, American new wave of filmmaking, which, frankly speaking, Faye Dunaway had been the poster child for. Um, the American new wave of filmmaking, a lot of times, uh, is credited with having been started with the release of Bonnie and Clyde in 1967, the movie that put Faye Dunaway on the map and arguably reached its height with Roman Polanski's Chinatown, which starred Faye Dunaway and is still acclaimed as one of the great Hollywood films of all time. Um, and then Network in 1976, for which Faye Dunaway received the Oscar for Best Actress. And Mommy Dearest in 1981 really marks the end of that era because that was the summer that Steven Spielberg's Raiders of the Lost Ark was released. And that summer more or less marked the rise of the special effects laden blockbuster movies championed by Steven Spielberg, that led to the current era of filmmaking that we are currently in. It's not necessarily a bad thing, it just simply is a different type of movie making and a different type of movie. And as a result, it required a different type of actress. Faye Dunaway, at the start of filming Mommy Dearest, had just turned 40 years old. She had really found her métier during the previous 10 or a dozen years, um, starring in many, many A-list movies at that time. after Mommy Dearest, the roles that she really excelled at were starting to dry up. They just weren't making those types of movies anymore. And it was more than just simply Mommy Dearest that quote unquote derailed her career, as a lot of people have said. Um, Movies were changing, and the character driven movies Faye Dunaway had specialized in were just not being made as often,
Yeah, I love the way you
you
drew
know.
an analogy of those two eras. I think that's really important to understand that context of where Faye was in her career, as much as, well, how this movie impacted her. Which brings me to my final question: do you think when Faye Dunaway's body of work is judged, do you really think it's that much of a tarnish right now to look back at it, this role, or is it something that really almost highlights her ability to lose herself in a role and bring to it the strength, the energy, the conviction, the commitment to a role that she's just so phenomenally known for.
Well, I think Mommy Dearest showcases the fact that Faye Dunaway is, as I say in the book, a sorceress that can summon the elements like no other. She she gives a powerhouse performance, and there are very few people who can summon both the energy as well as conviction to play that on screen. It takes a lot of energy, and Faye Dunaway is nothing if not a ball of energy, according to pretty much every account. Um, I think Mommy Dearest at the time was seen as kind of a black mark on her because Joan Crawford had just passed away just 4 years earlier. She passed away in 1977. So the movie's release in 1981, it was one of those cases of, quote unquote, too soon. But 4 decades on, it is simply seen as one more great performance in an enviable body of work. And again, as I say in the book, if you're lucky, you get one. And Faye Dunaway has no less than 3 movies that are on the lists by the Academy, the Motion Picture Academy, the Academy, the AFI, the BFI, and every other critic agrees at least 3 of those movies are in their top 100 best films of the 20th century. She's done a great many more movies than just those 3, but those are the 3,
Mhm.
Bonnie and Clyde, Chinatown, and Network are on everyone's list in the top
Absolutely.
100 American movies. And and she's done so much more than that. I mean, when the parts were drying up, like Joan Crawford, she pulled herself up by her bootstraps. She basically searched for projects on her own. She had spearheaded the made-for-television movie Cold Sassy Tree, adapted from a best-selling novel I think it was in 1988 that they did that, starring Richard Widmark and Neil Patrick Harris. It was a charming, really highly acclaimed production, and it was the first of Ted Turner's produced made for television movies. Faye was rightly acclaimed, had also done the same thing in the mid 80s. She appeared in a low budget, very, very low budget movie called Barfly, based on a Charles Bukowski story, co starring with Mickey Rourke. Both of them took on roles deferring payment and because they believed in the roles. And the movie, even though it was this gritty, grimy, low budget movie, received a great deal of critical acclaim. Whatever criticism she would have received from Mommy Dearest, in theory was negated. And I think it was 1986 when Barfly was released. Gone out of her way to prove herself more than just simply an actress. She's accomplished a lot in producing and at least attempting directing. She had directed a short film in the early 2000s, and she attempted directing a version of Terrence McNally's Masterclass, in which he would play Maria Callas. I think they got about two-thirds of the way through filming when the financing ran out. But she has proven that she's got the guts, the intelligence, and the perseverance that Crawford said she possessed.
And we're going to have to wrap it up here, but thank you so much, Ashley Hoff, for being with us. Please go out and grab that book, With Love, Mommy Dearest. It's excellent. It's going to be a great addition to your vacay items all list to include in your suitcase. And Ashley, once again, thank you so much for being with us. We are so honored to have you with us. And it was a great book. I really enjoyed it. This is In Their Own League. I am Joan Amon, and we will see you next time.